Drethval sat in his command chair and looked at the planet below him like a man who had already won. The planet was blue and green and wrapped in white clouds. It looked soft. It looked quiet. It looked like a world that had no idea what was coming for it. Drethval liked that. He had seen that look on many worlds before, and every single one of them had eventually stopped fighting and started surrendering. This one, he was sure, would be no different. He reached forward and pressed the button on his recording console. A small red light blinked on. The official war report had begun. "This is Supreme War Commander Drethval," he said, in the calm and measured tone of a general who had done this many times before. "Commander of the 7th Advance Fleet, Vrethkai Dominion. Campaign designation, Sol Pacification. Target species, human. Current date by Dominion Standard. Cycle 4, Mark 9. I am beginning my preliminary assessment." He leaned back in his chair and folded his long gray fingers together. "The humans," he said, "are not a serious threat." He said it the way someone says a fact that does not need arguing, like saying the sky is dark in space or that fire is hot. He said it because every piece of intelligence his scouts had gathered over the past 3 years agreed with him completely. The humans fought each other. They had been doing it for thousands of years. They had wars over land, over food, over ideas, over things so small that Vrethkai analysts had read the reports twice, just to make sure they were not mistranslated. They were emotional in ways that made them unpredictable in small situations but predictable in large ones. When something was bigger than them, when the odds were clearly impossible, they broke. Every model said so. Every simulation confirmed it. Drethval's fleet was not small. It was 312 warships, arranged in a formation that had broken the back of 14 different civilizations across 4 centuries of Dominion expansion. The humans had sensors. They would see the fleet. They would count the ships. And then, his analysts had calculated, they would begin to panic. "My projections," Drethval continued into the recorder, "place full human capitulation at 72 hours from first contact. I expect minimal resistance in the early phase, moderate resistance in the middle phase, as their military attempts a structured response, and then collapse. The pattern is standard. I have seen it before, and I expect to see it again." He paused and picked up a data pad from the arm of his chair. "I am noting for the record that the human military structure is, by any measurable standard, chaotic. They do not have a single unified command. They have multiple nations, multiple armies, multiple fleets. Their communication systems are layered and inconsistent. Their response time to large-scale threats is slow. It is my professional opinion that this species has survived this long, not because of military strength, but because no one has bothered to invade them yet." He set the pad down. He almost smiled. "That changes today." On the moon, in a building carved into gray rock, a woman named Dana Webb was staring at a screen and not blinking. She was a lieutenant. She was 29 years old. She had dark eyes and a habit of tapping her fingers on the desk when she was thinking hard, and right now her fingers were tapping fast enough to leave a rhythm. The screen in front of her was showing the outer edge of the solar system. There were dots on it. The dots were moving. There were a lot of dots. She had been awake for 11 hours. She had drunk 3 cups of coffee. She had run the numbers 4 times and gotten the same answer every time, which was not the answer she had wanted. She turned in her chair and looked across the room at a man sitting at another console. His name was Cole Harrington. He was a captain. He was 34, with short brown hair and the kind of face that stayed calm even when it probably should not be calm. He was reading the same data she was reading. He was reading it slowly, the way you read something when you want to make sure you understood it right the first time. "Cole," she said. He looked up. "I count 312, she said. He looked back at the screen. Then he looked at her again. "Yeah," he said. "I count 312 too." The room was quiet for a moment. There were 4 other people in it, all of them watching their own screens, all of them very still. "Command is being slow," Dana said. "Command is being slow," Cole agreed. "We don't have time for slow." "No," he said. "We don't." He stood up from his chair and walked to the large display at the front of the room. He pulled up the map of the fleet's approach vector and stood there with his arms crossed, looking at it. Dana came and stood next to him. The Vrethkai fleet was coming in from the outer system, moving in a shape that Dana's training told her was a standard compression formation. It was designed to push forward and squeeze inward at the same time, catching defensive lines between two walls of firepower. It was clean and disciplined, and it had clearly been used many times before. Cole studied it for a long moment. "They've done this before," he said. "Many times," Dana said. "They're confident." "Very." He turned his head and looked at her. "What are you thinking?" Dana Webb tapped her fingers on her arm. She was looking at the formation. She was looking at the two wings of it, curving inward like a pair of hands about to clap together. She was looking at the space between them, the killing ground, the place no sane commander would ever put their ships voluntarily. "I'm thinking," she said slowly. "Not that they expect us to behave." Cole waited. "And I'm thinking," she continued, "that maybe we shouldn't." He looked at the map again. He looked at that gap, the place between the two wings. "Dana," he said, "that's the most dangerous part of their entire formation." "Yes," she said. "If you go in there, both wings can fire on you at once." "Yes," she said again. "So you'd have to make sure both wings were too busy to notice you were there." She looked at him. Something close to a smile crossed her face. "Exactly," she said. Cole turned back to the screen. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he let out a long, slow breath through his nose. "How long do we have before they reach weapons range?" he asked. 14 hours, said Dana. "Maybe 15. Enough time to prep?" "If we start now." He nodded once, and he reached up and pressed the comm button on the display panel. "This is Captain Harrington," he said. "All available fighter squadron leads. Report to the main briefing room in 30 minutes. And someone get me a list of every cargo freighter we have in dock right now." The room came alive. People started moving, talking, pulling up new screens. Dana Webb went back to her console and started pulling up frequencies. She needed something specific, something loud, something that would fill up every open channel and make every receiver on a Vrethkai ship twitch with confusion. She found what she was looking for and saved it to a drive. Then she picked up her coffee, found it was cold, and drank it anyway. Outside, 312 warships continued their slow and certain march toward a planet their commander had already decided was finished. Dreth Val pressed the pause button on his recorder and gazed down at the blue world below. 72 hours, he said again, quietly, to no one. He was very sure of himself. He would not stay that way for long. Dreth Val pressed the record button again and cleared his throat. "Continuing the report," he said. "First engagement. I will describe the events as clearly and as accurately as I am able. I want the High Council to understand that what happened was not the result of any failure on the part of this fleet. What happened was the result of the humans doing something that no species we have ever encountered has done before. I will explain." He paused. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. They went into the gap. It started 14 hours after Dana Webb had looked at the Vrethkai formation and decided that behaving was not a good strategy. Cole Harrington sat in the cockpit of his fighter and looked at the space ahead of him. The Vrethkai fleet was fully visible now, not just on sensors, but actually visible. Long, dark shapes arranged in perfect lines across the dark. They were big. They were steady. They moved the way things move when they know they are going to win. Cole had 22 fighters behind him, 22 fighters going up against 312 warships was not a military strategy. It was something closer to a statement. He opened the comm channel to his squadron. "Listen up," he said. "We are not trying to win this fight. We are trying to make some noise. Every ship in that fleet is going to be watching us in about 4 minutes. I need them watching us for as long as possible. So I need all of you to be as strange as you can manage. Do not fly straight. Do not fly in formation. Do whatever occurs to you. Ready?" There was a short silence on the channel. Then one of the pilots said, "Can I do barrel rolls?" Cole said, "Do as many barrel rolls as you want." The same pilot said, "Outstanding." Cole switched over to a different channel. The open broadcast, the one that would reach every receiver in range, including every Vrethkai ship in the fleet. He plugged in the drive Dana had given him before launch. He pressed play. The music started. It was loud. It was fast. It had a rhythm like a machine that had broken in an interesting way. Dana had chosen it specifically because she had read in a xenolinguistics report that the Vrethkai species communicated partly through tonal patterns, which meant that strong and irregular sound frequencies caused a brief but real disruption to their cognitive processing. Not long. Maybe 30 seconds of confusion before they adapted. But 30 seconds, Dana had said, was enough to make them look. And they looked. On the bridge of the Vrethkai flagship, every officer turned toward the sound sensors at the same moment. The signals coming in from the approaching human ships were unlike anything in any database. The sounds were irregular, rhythmically complex, and broadcasting on a frequency that overlapped with Vrethkai internal communication bands. Drethval stood up from his command chair. "What is that?" he said. And his communications officer said, "It appears to be music, Commander." Drethval stared at her. "Music." "Yes, Commander." "They are flying into the kill zone of our formation," he said slowly. "And they are playing music." "Yes, Commander." Drethval sat back down. He looked at the sensor display. 22 small human fighters were approaching the central gap of his formation at high speed, and they were not flying in any recognizable pattern. They were spinning. Some of them were doing long, looping turns for no clear reason. One of them appeared to be flying briefly upside down relative to the plane of the ecliptic, which was operationally meaningless and yet somehow deeply unsettling. "Why?" said Drethval. "Are they upside down?" No one answered him. No one had an answer. "Target them," he said. "All forward guns." "I target them." The guns tracked the fighters, but the fighters were not flying straight and they were not flying predictably, and the targeting systems that were designed to calculate the path of a normal opponent kept recalculating and not quite firing, because by the time the system decided on an angle, the fighters had done something else unexpected. The music continued. It was getting louder. Drethval watched the display and felt the first faint whisper of something he had not felt in a very long time. He was not sure what to call it. It was somewhere between confusion and irritation and something that might, in a lesser commander, be called unease. Dana Webb was not flying. Dana Webb was sitting in the cargo bay of a large freighter called the Harrisburg, which was not a military ship. And it was a cargo hauler. It smelled like machine oil and old packaging material and the specific smell of a ship that had been running routes in the outer belt for 12 years without a full cleaning. There were 2 other freighters with her. Their names were the Fort Collins and the Keene River. None of them looked like weapons. That was the point. All 3 ships had been moving for the past 6 hours, very slowly, on a route that did not look like an approach. It looked like a drift. It looked like 3 cargo haulers that had been caught in the wrong part of space at the wrong time and were simply trying to stay out of the way. The Vrethkai fleet's rear sensors had noted them and flagged them as non-military and non-threatening. That assessment had not changed. Dana checked her timer. Cole's squadron had been broadcasting for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The Vrethkai fleet's attention was entirely forward. Every sensor, every gun, every officer was looking at 22 small fighters doing barrel rolls and playing loud music in the most dangerous place in the formation. "Ready?" she said into her comm. The crew chief next to her said, "Doors open in 10. Dana watched the rear wall of the cargo bay split open. Cold space and the distant light of the sun came in. Below the open door, loaded into release rails, were 460 proximity mines. They had been painted the same flat gray as the hull of the freighter, and they were very small, and they were extremely patient. "Release," said Dana. The mines dropped. They did not make a sound. They just fell away into the dark and spread out quietly, so settling into the space between the Vrethkai rear column and any route back out of the system. Then Dana said, "All 3 ships maximum burn, get clear." The freighters ran. The mines waited. The rear column of the Vrethkai fleet hit the minefield 40 seconds later. The first explosion was small, but small explosions on the hull of a warship draw attention very fast, and the second and third ships in the rear column were already turning to investigate when they hit their own mines. And then it was not small anymore. Drethval heard the alerts before he saw the display update. He turned around in his command chair and looked at the rear sensor feed, and for 3 full seconds, he did not say anything at all. 4 ships in his rear column were venting atmosphere. 2 more had lost engine function. The rest of the rear column was scattering, each captain making their own decision about which direction to move, which meant the tight and perfect formation was no longer tight and no longer perfect. He looked at the forward display. The human fighters were already pulling back. The music had stopped. "How?" said Drethval. His tactical officer said quietly, "Cargo ships, Commander. They were civilian vessels. They were not flagged as a threat." Drethval looked at the tactical officer. He looked at the display. He looked at the space where his rear column had been. "Cargo ships," he said. "Yes, Commander." He pressed record on his personal report console without even thinking about it. "Logging for the record," he said in a voice that was very flat and very careful, "that the humans have achieved a tactical strike against the rear of this fleet using what appear to be repurposed civilian haulers. I am classifying this as an unanticipated behavioral irregularity. I am formally requesting that xenopsychology specialists be assigned to this campaign. I am also requesting that all civilian vessels near this fleet be reclassified as potential threats regardless of their appearance." He stopped recording. He looked at the damage report still climbing on his screen. Then he said to himself and no one else, "They used cargo ships." He said it like a man, trying very hard to understand something that did not make any sense. He would have this feeling again. Several more times, in fact. He did not know that yet. Drethval pressed record again. He had been pressing record a lot lately. Continuing the report," he said. "Second ground engagement. I want to begin this section by stating, clearly and for the permanent record, that I am a serious military commander with 41 years of active campaign experience. I say this because what I am about to describe may cause members of the High Council to question whether this report was filed in error, or whether I have suffered some kind of stress-related cognitive episode. I have not. Everything in this section is accurate. I have triple verified it." He stopped. He looked at the wall for a moment. "The humans used a farm," he said. The Vrethkai ground advance began 2 days after the first fleet engagement. Drethval had ordered a land push across the European continent, using 3 battalions of his best ground troops. And his strategy was clean and simple. Move fast, take the major communication hubs, and cut the human military's ability to coordinate a response. Without coordination, human forces would fragment. Fragmented forces were easy to finish. The 3 battalions landed outside a wide stretch of flat land that the humans called the Rhine Valley. The terrain was good for movement, open fields, easy ground, low hills in the distance. Drethval's field commanders reported that the area was mostly agricultural. There were farms. Nobody considered the farms a problem. Sergeant Lou Briggs was not supposed to be anywhere near the Rhine Valley. He was a ground forces sergeant, 38 years old, with a long record of doing things that his commanding officers described as creative when they were being polite, and reckless and borderline insane when they were being honest. He was not tall. He was not particularly fast. He had a wide face and a calm voice and a habit of looking at a bad situation and saying, "Okay, so what have we got?" What he had in the Rhine Valley was 31 soldiers, no heavy weapons, very limited ammunition, and 3 Vrethkai battalions moving toward the only road that connected the eastern command posts to the western supply line. He also had a farm. 2 farms, actually. One was a grain farm, run until 3 days ago by a family that had evacuated south. The other was a livestock operation, mostly cattle. Both had been abandoned in a hurry, which meant the equipment was still there. Lou walked through the first farm slowly, looking at everything. He looked at the irrigation systems, which ran on pressurized water and covered about half a kilometer of field. He looked at the fertilizer storage, large sealed tanks near the back of the main barn. He looked at the grain silos and the mechanical spreaders used to distribute seed across the fields. Then he walked to the hardware store in the nearest village, which had also been evacuated, and spent an hour inside it. When he came back, he had a list. He sat his 31 soldiers down in the barn and explained the plan. There was a long silence when he finished. One of the soldiers said, "Sarge, are you serious?" Lou said, "Do I look like I'm joking?" The soldier looked at him. Lou never looked like he was joking. "All right," the soldier said. But if this works, I want it noted that I was here." "Everyone's going to know you were here," Lou said. "Trust me." The 3 Vrethkai battalions entered the Rhine Valley fields at midday local time. It was a clear day. The ground was dry. Everything looked exactly like open farmland, which was exactly what it was. For the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then the irrigation systems switched on, but they were not running water. Lou's team had spent most of the previous night running lines from the fertilizer tanks into the irrigation system, pumping in a specific mixture of compounds that, when dispersed as a fine mist over a large area, created an atmospheric condition that the Vrethkai biological system found deeply and completely unbearable. It was not poison. It would not kill anything. But the Vrethkai respiratory system had a highly sensitive reaction to certain nitrogen-heavy compounds. And what came out of those irrigation heads was a thick, low cloud of exactly the wrong kind of air for a Vrethkai soldier to be breathing. Within 6 minutes, the lead battalion was in full disarray. Soldiers were pulling back to get clear of the mist. Commanders were calling for medical support. The advance stopped completely. Then the grain spreaders started. Lou's people had loaded the mechanical spreaders with a second compound, something found in the hardware store, a common pest deterrent that was completely harmless to humans, but reacted with Vrethkai skin in a way that produced intense, persistent irritation. It was not dangerous. And it was just very unpleasant in a way that made it almost impossible to think about anything else. The spreaders moved down the field in slow, patient lines, spreading the compound across the area where the 2nd and 3rd battalions were trying to regroup. It took about 8 minutes for all 3 battalions to request a full withdrawal from the valley. Lou watched them go from the roof of the barn, eating a sandwich he had found in the farmhouse kitchen. He chewed slowly. He looked very calm. "Log it," he said to the soldier next to him, who was holding a field comm unit. "Valley is clear. Request resupply at the Eastern Road Junction." The soldier sent the message. Then she said, "Sarge, what do we put in the report for how we did this?" Lou thought about it. "Put used available resources," he said. Drethval stared at his tactical display and read the report from his ground commanders 3 times. 3 battalions. Pulled back by a mist. He picked up his personal recorder. "I am logging," he said, and his voice was very careful and very controlled. A second significant tactical event. 3 ground battalions were halted and forced to withdraw from an agricultural zone in the European region. The cause of the withdrawal was an environmental disruption created by the humans using the farm equipment already present in the area. I want to be clear about what this means. The humans had access to military weapons. They had trained soldiers in the area. They had defensive positions. And they chose to stop 3 of my battalions with fertilizer and a pest spray. He stopped recording. He sat very still. "My fertilizer," he said quietly. He pressed record again. "I am formally noting that human tactical thinking does not appear to be limited by the resources that are conventionally considered military in nature. They appear to look at any environment and ask what it can be made to do. This is unusual. I am adding a request to my earlier recommendation for xenopsychology support. I am now also requesting a complete environmental survey of every area where ground troops are operating. Fields, farms, hardware facilities, storage buildings, anywhere that contains materials that could be used in ways we are not expecting." He paused again. "I feel it is important to note that I did not think I would need to say that. In 41 years of campaigns, I have never needed to tell my officers to be careful of farms." He stopped the recording. Far from the farm and far from Dreth Val's flagship, Dana Webb was not sleeping. She was in a small room in Lunar Command with a cup of cold coffee and a screen full of numbers. She had been watching the Vrethkai fleet's communication patterns for the past 30 hours, writing down timestamps, measuring gaps, looking for anything that repeated. And she had found something. It was small, easy to miss. Between the moment when Dreth Val issued a fleet-wide command and the moment when the individual ships confirmed and executed the command, there was a gap. It was not long. It was consistent. It happened every single time, without fail, and it happened because the Vrethkai command structure was very formal. Every order had to pass through a verification layer before the fleet could act on it. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That was the gap. Dana Webb wrote it down on a piece of paper with a pen because she wanted it in front of her where she could look at it. She looked at it for a long time. 4 minutes and 11 seconds was not very long. It was shorter than most people's lunch break. It was shorter than the time it took to make a pot of coffee, but it was long enough. She was already thinking about what could be done in 4 minutes and 11 seconds if you knew exactly when those 4 minutes were going to start. She picked up her pen and started writing notes in the margin of the paper, and she wrote for a long time, and her coffee stayed cold and untouched. And outside the small window of her room, the stars were steady and quiet and completely unaware of what she was planning. Dreth Val pressed record. He pressed it slowly, like a man who was not entirely looking forward to what he was about to say. Continuing the report. Third major engagement. I want to open this section with a statement I have not made in 41 years of service. I am writing what follows under formal protest. Not because I believe the events are in dispute. They are not in dispute. My own ship's logs confirm every detail. I am writing under protest because I believe the events reflect a method of warfare so irregular and so outside the boundaries of accepted military conduct that I do not think the Dominion's current reporting framework has a category for it. He stopped. He breathed. The humans sent us a memo, he said. A fake one, and we listened to it. Dana Webb had spent 4 days preparing. She had the timestamp data. And she had the gap, 4 minutes and 11 seconds between a Vrethkai fleet-wide command and the fleet's execution of that command. She had the communication frequency that Dreth Val's fleet used for internal orders. And she had, after a very long and very technical conversation with a signals officer named Petra Novak, something that looked, to a Vrethkai receiver, exactly like a valid Vrethkai command authorization code. It was not a real code. It was a reconstruction. Petra had built it from intercepted signal data over 5 days of patient, careful work, layering frequencies and timing patterns until the output was close enough to pass the fleet's automated verification check for at least the first 30 seconds of processing. 30 seconds was not 4 minutes. But it did not need to be. It only needed to reach every ship in the fleet at the same moment and trigger the verification sequence. Once the sequence started, the fleet would hold position until it completed. That was how the Vrethkai command structure worked. Orders were not executed until verified, and verification took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Dana had timed everything around that window. She had talked to Cole. She had talked to every squadron lead still operational. She had pulled every remaining long-range gun battery on the lunar surface and pointed them at the left flank of the Vrethkai formation. She had arranged the fire sequence so that the moment the fleet froze, every gun and every fighter would fire at the same target from multiple angles at once, a coordinated strike that would not be possible against a moving, reacting fleet. But would be very possible against a fleet that was sitting still and waiting for paperwork to clear. She had not told many people the full plan, not because she did not trust them, because the plan sounded, when said out loud, like something a person would say as a joke. "We're going to send them a fake hold order," she had told Cole, alone in a back room late at night. He had looked at her. He had said, "Through their own command channel." "Yes." "Using a reconstructed authorization code." "Yes." "And they'll just stop for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, she said. "Yes." Cole had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "That's either the best idea I've ever heard, or I'm too tired to know the difference." Dana had said, "It might be both." The signal went out at 0340 hours, lunar time. It moved at the speed of light, and it reached the Vrethkai fleet in just under 2 seconds. Every ship received it at the same moment. Every ship's automated verification system picked it up and started running the check. On the bridge of his flagship, Drethval was standing at the tactical display, preparing to give the order for the final strike on Earth's remaining command infrastructure. His officers were in position. His ships were in formation. Everything was ready. His communications officer said, "Commander, fleet-wide hold signal received. Commander-level verification in progress." Drethval turned around. "I did not issue a hold signal." The officer looked at her console. "The signal carries a valid authorization header, Commander. The verification is running." "Abort the verification." "I cannot abort without a secondary command authorization, Commander. Standard protocol." Drethval stared at her. He was a man who had designed a command structure that was airtight and consistent and never made mistakes. He had spent years building that structure. He was now discovering that an airtight and consistent structure is also a structure that cannot be quickly interrupted when someone is using it against you. "Override it," he said. "Manual override requires—" "I know what it requires," he said. He moved to the command chair, reached for the override panel, and started entering the code sequence. It was long. It had many steps. Each step confirmed the previous one before allowing the next one to proceed. It was a very secure system. It was also a very slow one. So, 4 minutes and 9 seconds after the hold signal reached the fleet, the lunar gun batteries fired. They fired as one. 34 separate emplacements, all targeting the left flank of the Vrethkai formation, all releasing at the same moment. At the same time, Cole Harrington led every remaining fighter in a tight, fast run directly along the edge of the left flank, adding their fire to the battery strike from the opposite angle. The left flank had not moved. It had not raised shields to the new angle. It had not repositioned. It had been sitting exactly where it was, waiting for a verification to complete. The damage was severe. 11 ships in the left flank lost primary propulsion. 4 lost weapons function entirely. The 3 were so badly hit that their crews were already beginning emergency evacuation procedures before Drethval's override finally cleared and the hold signal was canceled. By the time the fleet could move and respond, Cole's fighters were already pulling back. The gun batteries had gone cold and dark. The attack was over. The whole thing had taken less than 5 minutes. Drethval stood at his display and looked at the damage report. He did not say anything for a very long time. Then he walked to his private console and pressed record and started talking. And he talked for a long time, and his voice had the specific quality of a man who is being very precise because he does not trust himself to speak loosely right now. "For the record," he said, "I am going to describe what has just occurred. I am going to describe it accurately, and I am going to ask the High Council to understand that I am aware of how this sounds." He stopped. He started again. "The humans sent a false command to this fleet using our own communication frequency and a reconstructed authorization code. The false command triggered our standard verification protocol, which is a protocol I personally designed and approved and have used without incident for 19 years. The verification process held my fleet in a fixed position for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. During those 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the humans executed a coordinated multi-angle strike against my left flank that caused significant damage and effectively removed 11 ships from combat-ready status." He stopped again. He looked at the ceiling. "I was defeated," he said, "very carefully, by a fake hold order. My own security system was used against me by a species that has been spacefaring for less than 200 years. I am noting this. I am noting it with great displeasure, and I am also noting that I am aware of no precedent for this in the history of Dominion military campaigns." He stopped the recording. He sat down in his command chair. He looked at the display, where the scattered left flank was slowly trying to regroup. He started recording again. "I am also noting, because it is relevant, that intercepted human communications during the period immediately following this attack were not tactical in nature. My signals team has provided transcripts. The human pilots appear to have spent the period after the strike telling each other jokes. I do not have full translations of the jokes. And the xenolinguistics team says the humor is difficult to render accurately in Vrethkai. What I do have is the general assessment, which is that the jokes were apparently well received." He stopped recording. "Jokes," he said. He said it very quietly. Cole Harrington landed his fighter and climbed out of the cockpit, and someone handed him a cup of water and he drank it standing on the deck. Lou Briggs had come up from the surface. He and Cole had not seen each other in 6 days. Lou nodded at Cole. Cole nodded back. "How'd it go?" Lou asked. "Dana sent them a fake memo," Cole said, "and they froze for 4 minutes. Lou looked at him. "A fake memo," Lou said. "A fake memo," Cole said. Lou thought about that. Then a slow, wide grin spread across his face. "Okay," he said. "That's pretty good." "It worked," Cole said. "Yes, that's the best part," Lou said. They stood there for a moment, and somewhere down the corridor someone laughed at something, and the sound of it carried through the whole bay, easy and light and unafraid. Drethval had not slept in 2 days. He did not often admit things like that. He was a commander. Commanders were supposed to be steady. They were supposed to be above the wear and grind of a difficult campaign, above the weight of decisions, above the slow accumulation of things that had not gone the way they were supposed to go. He sat in his command chair, and he looked at his fleet on the display, and he counted ships the way he had been counting ships every morning for the past 3 weeks. He had started with 312. He had 241 that could still fight. He had 19 that were functional but damaged. He had 32 that were under repair and would not be ready for another week. He had 20 that were no longer repairable. He had not lost a single ship in open battle. Every ship he had lost to things that were not supposed to be weapons, to cargo freighters loaded with mines, to farm irrigation systems filled with the wrong compounds, to a fake memo that had frozen his fleet for 4 minutes while the humans fired from an angle he had not covered because he had not known he needed to cover it. He was not losing this war because the humans were stronger. He was losing it because he did not understand them. And that he had come to believe over the past week, was not a problem that more ships or better weapons would solve. You could not outgun a species that was not following the rules of the fight. You could not outmaneuver a species that did not move the way they were supposed to move. You could not predict a species that looked at a farm and saw a weapons platform, that looked at a cargo ship and saw a warship, that looked at your own security protocol and saw a way to stop your entire fleet with a forged piece of paperwork. Drethval reached forward and pressed record. "Final section," he said. "I am concluding this report. I am going to give the High Council my full and honest assessment, and then I am going to make a recommendation that I have never made in my career. I will explain my reasoning." He straightened in his chair. "This fleet remains numerically superior to any force the humans can currently field, and our ships are individually more powerful. Our technology is more advanced. By every conventional measurement, we should have won this campaign within the projected 72 hours. We did not. We are now 6 weeks into an engagement that was classified as low resistance. And the resistance has not decreased. It has increased. Not in firepower, in creativity." He stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment. "The humans have no respect for what a weapon is supposed to be," he said. "Every species we have ever encountered has fought using the tools designated for fighting. They build weapons. They use weapons. They defend against weapons. The humans fight using everything. They fight using sound. They fight using agricultural equipment. They fight using paperwork. Every time my analysts predicted what they would do next, they did something else. Not because they are more intelligent than my analysts, but because they appear to approach every situation with a question my analysts do not ask." He paused. "My analysts ask, what is the best military response to this situation? The humans appear to ask, what can this situation give us that we have not thought of yet? Those are different questions. They produce very different answers, and I have no counter-doctrine for an opponent that will not stop asking the second question." He was quiet for a long moment. "I am formally recommending," he said, "that this campaign be suspended. Not because we have been defeated in the traditional sense. Our fleet is intact. Our forces are operational. We could continue, but continuing requires us to become something we are not, unpredictable, improvised, willing to discard every rule we have built over 4 centuries of successful campaigns. I am not willing to do that. I do not believe it is possible to fight humans on their own terms. They have had a lifetime of practice at it. We have not." He reached forward and turned the recorder off. Then he sat there for a while, just sitting, looking at the stars outside the viewport. After a long time, he turned to his bridge officer and said, "Set a withdrawal course. We are leaving." The officer looked at him. Then the officer said, "Yes, Commander," and turned to her console, and did not ask any questions because she had read the same reports Drethval had read, and she understood. The fleet turned. Slowly, one by one, the great dark ships of the Vrethkai Dominion began to move away from the blue planet. They moved in good order. Yet they were not running. They were leaving, which is a different thing, though it can look the same from far away. Drethval watched until Earth disappeared from the viewport. Then he went to his quarters and slept for 14 hours straight. The commendation ceremony was held in a room at Lunar Command that was too small for the number of people who wanted to attend, so most of them stood in the corridor and listened through the open door. Cole Harrington stood at the front of the room in his dress uniform, which he had borrowed from someone else because his own had a scorch mark on the left shoulder from a close miss in the second engagement. The uniform was slightly too big for him in the shoulders. He did not mention it. Dana Webb stood next to him. She had gotten 4 hours of sleep in the past 2 days, and it showed in a small way around her eyes, but she stood straight, and she did not fidget. General Harlow, who ran Lunar Command, gave a short speech. He did not say very much because there was not very much to say that the facts did not already say better. He pinned commendations on both of them. He shook their hands. He called them simply exceptional. Cole nodded once. Dana said, "Thank you, sir." Someone in the back of the room started clapping, and then everyone did, and it filled up the small room and the corridor and went on for longer than anyone expected. Afterward, there was coffee. Someone had brought real ground coffee from the surface, not the powdered kind, and the smell of it filled the room in a warm and comfortable way. People stood in small groups and talked, and the talking was easy, and more than once someone laughed at something. Lou Briggs was not there. He had sent a message 2 days before, saying that there was a relief operation forming up in the outer colonies, and they were short of experienced ground sergeants, and he had signed on. He said he was sorry to miss it. He said well done to everyone. He said to save him a cup of coffee if there was any left when he got back. There was not any left. Someone would owe him a cup. Drethvale's war report was filed through official channels as required. It was marked classified and forwarded to the High Council, who read it in private session and then argued about it for 3 days. They did not argue about whether the recommendation was right. Most of them, reading the report, it had come to the same slow conclusion that Drethvale had reached, that this particular campaign had run into something they did not have a playbook for. What they argued about was the report itself. Specifically, they argued about what to do with it, whether it should remain sealed, whether parts of it should be released to the General Dominion military for study, whether it reflected a failure of command or a failure of doctrine. In the end, a compromise was reached. The report was declassified in part and sent to the Vrethkai War College as a training document, not as an example of defeat, as an example of something the Dominion's military thinking had never fully accounted for, which was an opponent who did not fight the way opponents were supposed to fight. The War College instructors added it to the required reading list for all third-year strategic planning students. They placed it at the end of a module on the limits of predictive doctrine. The file had an official designation number and an official title, which was the formal name of the campaign, which was long and bureaucratic and which no one ever used when talking about it. Everyone who read it just called it the same thing, which was what Drethval's filing assistant had written on the internal label when first cataloging the document, not as an official title, but simply as a note to help find it later. The label said, "The Human Problem, Unsolved." It stayed that way. No one changed it. Because after everything that had happened, yes, after every farm and every cargo ship and every fake memo and every barrel roll and every joke told in a cockpit over a damaged alien fleet, it was still, honestly, the most accurate description anyone had managed to write. The humans were a problem. They had not been solved. And somewhere on a blue planet wrapped in white clouds, a lieutenant named Dana Webb was sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks, and a captain named Cole Harrington was drinking real coffee by a window, and a sergeant named Lou Briggs was already on a transport heading somewhere new. None of them thought of themselves as a problem. They were just people, doing what people do, which was, apparently, exactly the thing no one else in the galaxy could figure out how to stop.